Hello, welcome to Opinions New by Dr. Frank Tianshi. I'm Frank. Okay. In this episode, my topic is it time to reorganize or replace UN, the United Nations? Okay. After World War One, the League of Nations was born, but the League of Nations did not play the role in maintaining peace and preventing a new world war. The Second World War broke out. After World War II, human societies established the United Nations, right? But the United Nations did not really play the role in achieving lasting world peace either. Okay? The international community today is far from the mission of the UN from 75 years ago in terms of international law, international security, economic development, social progress, human rights, civil liberties, political freedom, democracy, and world peace. Okay? And currently, we can see that the countries of this world, yeah, are really in a final fight between the countries of democracy and freedom, and also communism and socialist countries. Okay? And in this battle, final battle, I think, final battle, there might not be any real conflicts. Yeah, there isn't really a real, not brick and mortar, but the war between countries with bombshells, not yet. And there might not be a World War III, but the conflict, the confrontation between the two sides, and also its significance to the future of humanity. I think, in my opinion, is no less than the first two world wars. Okay? But before this, the final battle being that would determine the fate of humanity, were what about the United Nations? United Nations and these affiliate organizations, we can see that they have become the puppet of those authoritarian regimes and become the symbol of low efficiency and waste. Right? And should the international community at this time, start over, reform, reorganize, or rebuild a new global order? Should the United Nations be replaced by a new world organization, just like the League of Nations was replaced by the United Nations? Okay? Over the years, last few years, we have seen that the United States has been quitting or withdrawing from several organizations, some organizations under the UN, and which of course stirred up, a lot of controversies. And if President Trump is successful in getting a second term, right, and U.S. policies will certainly continue as is, right, and America will continue to ask UN to reform, and also ask those affiliate organizations under the UN to reform. Those organizations from UN Human Rights Organization to World Trade Organization, World Health Organization, UN, UNESCO, World Organization on Agriculture and Food, and the U.S. will ask them to have a thorough reform. Right? And if not, if they refuse or they cannot cannot reform according to or per U.S. demand, what will the United States do? Would America withdraw from the United Nations? Okay? And also, as Chinese Americans or people from Taiwan, from China, were all concerned about the Taiwan or the Republic of China, not People's Republic. People's Republic of China is a communist in the mainland. Republic of China is in Taiwan. And will U.S. Help Taiwan to go back, to return to United Nations, to regain its membership UN. And after all, the Republic of China was actually the founding member of UN. And so the UN itself, what will it do? Would UN continue its reform, and to satisfy the needs of America, or will the United States actually quit or withdraw from UN if it does not do uh, what America wants it to do? Okay? If we look at the world today, we can see that America and its European and Americans, European allies, they have shifted their strategic focus to China, to the Chinese Communist government. Right? In the new strategic concept of 2030 of NATO, Chinese regime is being listed as the top threat. Right? And also, the threat by China using new technology to coerce, to threaten global security has also become a concern of UN. NATO Secretary Stoltenberg said in Global Security Forum that NATO needs a brand new strategic concept to counter the terrorism and threat from Chinese communists. And they want a new strategic concept to replace the one that was proposed 10 years ago. In an interesting study by the Pew Research Center in the US found that they conducted the research on 14 countries about their opinion on China. 14 countries, including the United States and many developed countries, about their opinion on China. Right? The negative view or negative remark on China has reached an all-time high. Right? I think this global research or global poll, shows that the confrontation between China and the West, with regard to their ideology, and is escalating, okay? And also that there is alliance led by America to counter, to fight the Chinese communists, and this new alliance is starting to take shape, in my opinion. Okay? If you look at what China did, what the Chinese Communist government did, with regard to human rights, for example, the regime is continuing its persecution of Falun Gong spiritual movement. And also the government is continuing its persecution for abuse of human rights in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang, and in Tibet. And the Western countries have been neglecting or overlooking the human rights abuse in China for many, many years, unfortunately. But they have finally started to become weakened. They realize that the very foundation of Western society, right, is basic human rights and rule of law. Right? And that's exactly what the Chinese Communist government is against. Yeah? In Europe today, European countries from Germany to France to Great Britain, and not only just the government, but also the European media, civil society, and the opposition party, and even some members of the ruling party, they all have started to voice their, wishes, or they're not wishes. I mean, start to voice loudly against, communist human rights abuse in China and retraction of political reform. Right? In the ranking of the Pew's research, the list of countries that has the least trust or had the least favorable image or opinion about China, these are all OECD countries or G7 countries. Right? These countries, from their government to their academia, the media, and the general public, they have been dealing with China's communist government for political issues, for diplomacy, trade, and technology, and human rights, and they have all witnessed they're trusted by the CCP, the communists, Chinese communists. They've been hurt. Yeah? And like Australia, for example, Australia has been retaliated by the Chinese communists. Yeah? The Chinese diplomacy, the style of diplomacy they call the fighting wolves diplomacy, give like countries like those mild, normally very mild, peaceful countries like Sweden, leave them with a really bad impression, and they start to fight back, start to speak up against Chinese abuse. Okay? And also, things are happening in with Great Britain, and we can see that the Great Britain, its opinion, its attitude towards China is changing. Its standard on China is changing, even though the Chinese community has done many things to isolate, to divide and conquer, yeah, among European countries. We have seen that things start to change. The Johnson administration has changed a lot, during and after this pandemic. Right? Of course, this has everything to do with American diplomacy. And Secretary of State Pompeo had visited Europe, Australia, Asia, and paid a lot of visits, and to explain American stance on these issues, and to review the Chinese communist attempt to infiltrate the world. And now, with this pandemic and the severe consequences, now the British has finally realized, how evil this Chinese regime is. And now we have seen changes in British attitude on Huawei's 5G network. It is commonly believed that ever since this COVID-19 pandemic started from Wuhan, China, right, the whole geopolitical landscape of the world has changed, has emerged to before and after, two parts, before and after. And after the pandemic, the world today will never be the same as before. So there is going to be many, many big changes in our world today, right? But also we notice many people are anticipating, thinking the next wave of the pandemic may be coming to us very soon. Some say it could be in December or even in November. Okay? So we have more concerns, more worries about what this global situation is going to be. Okay? The President Trump has announced has appealed in his video speech to the UN General Assembly in September 22nd. His video conferencing, and he said something to the fact that the UN should hold China accountable for this pandemic. Yeah. So as of today, this pandemic has infected 31 million people, with almost 960,000 people dying of that. Right? The university professor, a law professor from Hofstra University, Julian Koo, said something like this. He said, Trump's speech, as a president, a U.S. president speaking at the United Nations and to criticize China is very unusual, something very unusual. And he's trying to say that she said something like China is responsible for the spread of the pandemic, and called the virus the China virus. And obviously, the president is seeking global support to hold China accountable. Right? We know the Trump administration has already cut off the U.S. Funding to World Health Organization, right? because this pandemic is causing damages worldwide, life damages probably worldwide, and to hold China responsible, accountable, or to seek payment from China, you have to have a global cooperation or coordination. But this kind of cooperation is not impossible, almost impossible to realize within the framework of the current international organization, the United Nations. Okay? We can see that even though America and the Western allies has started, a fight against global communism, right, and to hold China accountable. But we also know that China has a seat as a permanent member of UN Security Council, and with the permanent membership in the UN Security Council, China can veto all the actions or proposals proposed in the United Nations to hold China accountable for the pandemic. Right? And what can the United States do? That's a challenge here. 2 years ago, back in September of 2018, when Trump had that speech at the United Nations face-to-face, he asked for reform by the United Nations. Right? In October of 1918, Vice President Pence said something about the U.S. policy towards China, and also said the U.S. is ready, is determined to reform global politics, and if UN refuse to reform, America would build a new international alliance and to build a new international political landscape. So I think the Trump administration has already had this reforming or reforming UN or appointing or establishing a new organization, global new organization in their mind. Yeah. We can see that the one thing unique about Trump administration that's different from previous administration is that the U.S. has withdrawn from many organizations, global organizations, right? We have seen that the U.S. has withdrawn from UNESCO, from Human Rights Commission, from Paris Climate Accord, from the mid-range ballistic missile treaty with Russia, and others. And also, U.S. is considering, withdrawing from World Trade Organization and World Health Organization. We know that of all those organizations under the United Nations, many of them are infiltrated by the Chinese Communist government. Right? 4 of them are directly under Chinese control right now. Of course, U.S. government, American government is not happy with that. So it's not at all, impossible for U.S. to consider leaving the United Nations, or if UN refuses to reorganize, right, or reform. I think, in my opinion, to withdraw from the UN, to weaken Chinese power and influence in this international forum could be an option for the United States, for the U.S. government. Right? Trump has told us that he's going to have a huge, big decision or big things moving. So what is the big thing? So what is the big decision that is forthcoming? Right? We don't know. So we are speculating. But is this withdrawing or withdrawing from the UN one of them? Right? We also heard that the U.S. is actually thinking about working with the Western alliances to form a new alliance with democracies. So this is not at all impossible. Taiwan issue is another one. Excuse me. Taiwan has become the central focus of U.S.-China relationship, and also part of the key partner in the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. And I think the U.S. reevaluation of United Nations and also breakthrough with Taiwan could be happening at the same time, it seems to me. If the U.S. recognizes Taiwan or Republic of China as an independent country, uh, what would Beijing do? Right? What if many countries, Western countries, in UN, they all follow suit and start to recognize Taiwan, recognize Republic of China? What would the Chinese government, the People's Republic of China, do in the UN? Okay? But the UN headquarters being closed, being shut down, or new alliance of democratic countries forming, and also the abolishment of UN Security Council, permanent membership of UN Security Council that gives the five countries, veto power, and also restoring Republic of China, Taiwan, as the founding member of UN. So there are many of those kind of discussions and talks. If you look at the United Nations, which is formed, established in 1945, and 75 years ago, right? It replaced the League of Nations in an effort to prevent war and to provide a dialogue, platform dialogue among nations. As of 2018, there were 193 countries in the United Nations. There are six major organizations, major um, branches or major, how to say that? There are really major parts of the United Nations, right? There's a general, six major components, let's say that. There's a General Assembly, yeah. There's a UN Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Secretariat, and the Hague, the, the International Tribunal. Okay? But what people are more familiar with as UN agencies are the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, and the UNESCO, and the Children's Foundation. Yeah. America being the largest contributor to the UN, we're paying $1.2 billion every year to UN as fees and dues. That's 22% of annual budget of the United Nations. But the UN is not really working on its founding principles. Yeah? And rather, the UN has become a club controlled by the Chinese government, Chinese communists, to be against America. Yeah? And if you look at the UN Human Rights Commission, right? They are not condemning the Chinese abuse, communist abuse of human rights in China, but also it incorporated, accepted many rogue countries that abuse human rights in their own countries to become a member of the Human Rights Commission, and they even kicked the U.S. out of the commission. Yeah. Also, the UN today, if you look at UN today, it's really not functioning very well. Yeah. The Secretary General of UN, Guterres, he asked for a global ceasefire amid our fight against the pandemic, but nobody, paid attention to him. Yeah. He's also calling for a $10 billion fund to fight the pandemic, the virus, but only, a quarter of that was promised. Right? And UN is not really working properly or effectively in stopping wars. We're seeing that the wars is ongoing right now between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yeah? But on the other hand, the U.S. government, Trump administration, through its diplomacy and military pressure, has been able to make breakthroughs with regard to Israel-Palestinian issue, Middle East, and also in the Balkans. So without, going through the United Nations. Okay? As to UN reform, and whether or UN headquarters moving or the veto power of UN Security permanent member of UN Security Council, the General Assembly's voting rights, or the expansion of UN Security Council. All these items, all these are on the agenda because they all affect the power and interest of the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council, and they can never be able to go through, especially with China and Russia in there. And the League of Nations that I mentioned in the beginning, the League of Nations was laughed at by Italian dictator Mussolini. He said that the U.S., the great ego of U.S. was failing. Right? And today, UN, the new organization to replace the League of Nations, is laughed at by the Chinese Communist regime because it has become a club, an anti-American club, owned and controlled by the Chinese Communists. So the history is just so ironic and so repeating itself, right? So it's really the League of Nations was not able to resolve all those confrontations in the world back then, and the United Nations is unable to resolve the problem of communist government's abuse of power and this effort to destroy this organization. And if you look at this, the League of Nations before, and it's actually a League of Nations, right? It's a League of Nations. It respects the sovereignty of different nations and work together. There's no super government, the global worldwide super government imposed on the nations. It's called the League of Nations. But today, the United Nations is more like a unity or unity of the nations. It's more like an organization towards globalization and internationalization. Turn all the countries over on Earth become into one, right? And now we know the UN is also manipulated and controlled by China and Russia, and it's far away from its original mission. If it doesn't change, it does not reform, and then will it become the target of this globalization effort? Okay? So I think for humanity to walk through this fiasco or walk through this difficult stage, we either have to go back to the original design of the League of Nations to expel or to deprive those communist regimes or authoritarian regimes of their veto power, or we can start a new organization, new global organization with the free country together to fight the global communism. But that's the only way for us, for the international community to go through this final, battle between good and evil. That's my opinion. Thank you very much. I will talk to you next time.